Hobgoblins of our mind. The psychology of antibiotic stewardship. Antibiotic stewardship is the effort to measure and improve how antibiotics are prescribed by clinicians and used by patients. There is a great need to improve our antibiotic stewardship as antibiotic resistance has reached a point when it can be called a crisis. As per WHO, 700,000 people die each year due to drug-resistant diseases. If not controlled, by 2050, 10 million people will die each year due to multi-resistant pathogens. To put that number into perspective, in the last 2 years 5.5 million people died worldwide due to COVID-19 pandemic. Various antibiotic stewardship models have been developed to combat this situation, which includes elements like staff education, interdisciplinary approach, infection control, surveillance and appropriate antibiotic prescription, for example start smart, then focus. However, another aspect is often overlooked, that is, the psychosocial factors of antibiotic prescribing, how we behave, consciously or subconsciously, when prescribing antibiotics, the hobgoblins of our mind. Let us look at a few of these psychosocial factors. There are many papers available on this topic, for example, Tonkin-Krein et al. Identified 7 factors that influence general practitioners' antibiotic prescribing. In this presentation, however, I would like to highlight a few behavioral aspects which Professor Cialdini describes in his book Influence. Although the context of this book was different, it applies to general human behavior. This presentation is an attempt to explore the possibilities of using his principles in the field of antibiotic stewardship. Social proof. It is a term coined by Professor Cialdini in 1984. Social proof is a psychosocial phenomenon by which people copy the action of others in an attempt to reflect correct behavior in a given situation. It is due to the fact that we feel safer and more comfortable when we belong to a group. We perceive it is safer to be an imitator, going with the flow, than being a contrarian. A very good example of social proof could be the reviews we see on online shopping platforms. A large number of 5 stars are often enough to convince us that a product is better than another product with exactly similar characteristics. Social proof is considered prominent in ambiguous social situations where people are unable to determine the appropriate mode of behavior, and is driven by the assumption that the surrounding people possess more knowledge about the current situation. Consider the situation the doctors, especially the junior doctors, find themselves in. A new ward, massive workload, often limited supervision, busy wards like accident and emergency, night shift when you are on your own. It is not unusual to experience confusion, tiredness, vulnerability, uncertainty in these situations, especially for someone with limited experience, early in their medical career. Often the decision doctors might take in this situation depends upon what they may have seen doing in a similar case. This is social proof. For example, in their paper published by Jennifer Broom and colleagues in the Journal of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy, they interviewed many doctors of various grades. It was mentioned that often a junior doctor chose an 4 antibiotic at night due to inexperience and 3 in the morning thinking to get the patient through till 9 am, so that more experienced doctors could take over. Tiredness, vulnerability, anxiety often make us take the safest possible path. A broad-spectrum antibiotic gives us that assurance that even if we miss an infection, it will most likely be covered. This is probably right when treating a patient with sepsis. However, this practice may get extended in less severe cases due to social proof, which we may have to be aware of. This is similar to what I believe we call a normative influence. Doctors are also likely to prescribe antibiotics more if that is the prevalent culture or a norm. The normative behavior can be modified by feedback. The normative feedback can be descriptive or injunctive. For example, Halsworth described sending feedback letters to general practitioners whose antibiotic prescribing was at the top 20% of all the GPs. The letter said, 1. The majority, that is 80%, of practice, prescribe fewer antibiotics per head than yours. And 2. Reducing unnecessary prescriptions in primary care may help prevent a public health catastrophe. The first sentence evoked a descriptive norm, urging the practitioners to conform to the prevailing practice, while the second sentence was an injunctive or moral norm. The reduction in antibiotic prescriptions was statistically significant in surgeries that received the letter. In this picture, a man seems to be lying unconscious on the ground. Many bystanders perceived something was wrong but did not take the initiative to help. What is going on here? Professor Cialdini raised the question of this phenomenon we often see nowadays in major cities. Is it because of an apathetic urban life or because there are so many observers? Although a certain degree of depersonalization cannot be ignored, it is actually due to a psychological phenomenon called pluralistic ignorance. Professor Cialdini suggested that when multiple potential helpers are present, each individual's personal responsibility is reduced. Everyone thinks that someone would help, but no one does. In this particular case, there might also be uncertainty. Is it an emergency? Why is no one helping if it is an emergency? He referred to the 1968 paper, by Daly and Latané, which suggested a victim was helped 85% times when a single bystander was present and 31% times when 5 bystanders were present. How pluralistic ignorance can affect us in the healthcare setting. Whose responsibility is antibiotic stewardship? Is it doctors, pharmacists, nurses, managers, or microbiologists' responsibility? There is an argument for and against each of them. However, antibiotic resistance is going to cause a problem for everyone. During their drug round, a nurse may notice that the IV antibiotic is ongoing for many days. She may take the initiating to ask the doctor to review. However, she may also refrain from doing so, thinking it is the doctor's responsibility. Junior doctors may review the patient and change the IV to oral antibiotic based on the guideline or clinical situation or wait for the consultant to make that decision. In the same paper, I referred to before, by Broom et al., a junior doctor commented in an interview that she never made that decision. It is usually the consultant or senior registrar who take the decision in the morning ward round. Commitment and consistency. Commitment and consistency are highly regarded qualities in our society. We want to be consistent and be in a routine. This is because it spares us from the labor of thought. Thinking is a process that takes much energy. Consider when you started learning to drive. Every maneuver needed a conscious action. I remember how difficult it was, and I used to think, how could someone keep an eye on so many things simultaneously? However, now I do all those maneuvers without even thinking about it. Once a stance has been taken, it allows us a convenient, relatively effortless, and efficient method for dealing with complex daily environments that make severe demands on our mental energies and capacities. Learned behavior is difficult to change, and it is valid for antibiotic stewardship. Once using broad-spectrum antibiotic become a learned behavior, it may take a long persistent effort from an antibiotic stewardship team to change that behavior. Senior doctors must be more careful about this consistency issue. We often form an opinion or design a practice based on some experience we might have had, for example, a complaint. We must review our practice regularly by speaking to other colleagues and reviewing new evidence. Authority. We tend to follow people with authority as we believe they know better. We think we're more likely to be correct than not by following them. However, there are two dilemmas here. 1. False authority. The person we are considering an authority may not be an expert on the subject we are dealing with. And 2. The person with authority still have a chance of being wrong. Professor Cialdini referred to an experiment done by social psychologists, which showed that the bystanders are more likely to flaunt a red traffic light while crossing the road by following a person in business attire, than someone in non-business attire. Consider this: A businessman is not an expert in road safety. In the healthcare setting, we must never forget to undertake the best evidence-based practice for our patients. We must learn from our seniors' and colleagues' experiences, but be careful before incorporating that knowledge into our practice. We must verify it ourselves, check standard guidelines and scrutinize the evidence base to support or refute the knowledge. Thank you for listening. I must say that I am a microbiologist and not a psychologist. This is my understanding of a few psychological aspects that might be useful in antibiotic stewardship. I believe a psychologist could be a valuable member of an antibiotic stewardship team. I would also strongly recommend the book by Professor Cialdini, which gives a wonderful insight into human behavior. We can only gain valuable insight from this book.